around a third of all the food that we produce is wasted every single year. That's well over 1 billion tons of food waste every single year, worth well over $1 trillion. So this is a huge amount of money wasted, a huge amount of resources wasted. But just to give you a couple of statistics, just in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that are used to grow the food that we throw away, is about 8 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And to put that into context, if food waste was a country, and it would be a really smelly, horrible country, I have to say, but still, if it was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. And we need an area the size of China to grow the food that is thrown away every single year. And this is against a backdrop where around 1 in 9 people on the planet go to bed every night hungry.
You are listening to Farm to Fork, a series from The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill. Today's episode is on food waste management.
Where are you, Cindy Paragill?
Well, Matthew Childs, I'm in a quiet corner in Geneva.
Quiet corner of Geneva, nice.
Yes. And where are you, Matthew Childs?
Well, I'm in a quiet corner of southeast London. But where should we be?
Well, we should be in our usual place for this series of The Standard Show, and that is at the delightful To Love Tea and Coffee House in London's Battersea, just down the road from Clapham Junction, and having our usual tea, coffee and cake.
Yes, we should, but sadly we are not. But of course, we may not be out having tea and cake, Cindy, but we are having some nonetheless. For me, nice builder's tea, Yorkshire Gold in fact. Other brands are available, but most are not nearly as good. And a slice of Victoria sponge, which I'm showing you, as you can see now, which, as you know, Cindy, and regular listeners will know, is the best cake.
Of course, whatever. My slice of red velvet beats your sponge cake anytime. Just look at it.
I know, actually, I must admit that does look good, but I know for a fact that it is just not as good. No.
I choose to disagree.
Well, we are arguing about cake again because this is Farm to Fork, our series on the relationship between standards and food.
Yes, and in this series, our menu of episodes loosely follows the food cycle of food innovation, production, packaging, distribution, consumption, and waste management, and featuring some of the key standards involved in each of them. And in this episode, we are looking at food waste management.
Yes, food waste management, and our final episode in this series.
I know, right? It's been quite a journey.
It has been a journey, a bit of a longer one than we both thought, but here we are at the final episode. Now, playing us in at the top of the episode was the voice of Richard Swannell. Now, Richard is Director of Impact Growth at an organisation called WRAP, a climate action NGO or non-governmental organisation, and Richard was describing the quite mind-boggling scale of the global food waste problem. Now, I spoke to Richard all about this problem and about the use of standards in helping to address it, but in particular about a new upcoming standard, one that is currently at the draft stage, and that is ISO 20001, a standard that will help organisations to measure, minimise and manage food waste.
Before we hear Matthew's conversation with Richard, let's hear from Sarah Walton from BSI to tell us more about the general relationship between standards and food waste. Now, when we started this series, Sarah was head of food sector at BSI. She has now moved on to a new role at BSI, but as it is the last episode in this series, we have invited her back.
My name is Sarah Walton, and I was formerly the head of food sector at BSI, and I'm now focusing more on issues to do with net zero. Food waste is a serious global problem. It's well documented that around a third of the world's food resources are lost annually as waste. These losses have huge economic impacts for organisations and for consumers. In developing countries, more waste tends to arise at the earlier stages of the supply chain, for example through food being spoiled during storage and through transportation. Whilst here in the UK, most food waste, around 70% or so, arises at the very end of the supply chain, in other words, in our homes. The environmental impacts from food waste are very significant. Around 20 to 30% of total global greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to the food system, which means it's a priority area for the net zero agenda, with, of course, a very key role for standards. Standards such as BS 8001, PAS 2050 and PAS 2060 are playing a role in helping the food sector to shift to much more sustainable operations generally. More specifically, the upcoming new management system standard on food waste management, ISO 20001, is going to provide a framework for food organisations to work actively and effectively to measure and reduce food loss and waste across the whole food supply chain. So for all parts of the food cycle, including food waste management, standards provide a way for everyone to agree what good looks like.
Here on The Standard Show, we really welcome your feedback. Please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Find and follow us on Twitter or X at Standard Show and on Instagram at The Standard Show. And check out the show notes for all of the ways to get in touch.
So, Richard Swannell is Director of Impact Growth at the climate action NGO WRAP. He's also a standards maker, chairing the BSI Standards Committee working on standards to address food loss and waste, which in turn provides input into the International Committee on Food Loss and Waste at ISO, which is developing ISO 20001. In this first slice of my conversation, I started by asking Richard to tell me more about WRAP.
Well, Matthew, WRAP is a not-for-profit climate NGO, climate action NGO. So what we're really all about is reducing greenhouse gas emissions right across supply chains. But what at the heart of what we do is drive system change. And we focus in three particular areas: the food system that we're going to talk more about today, plastics, which is intimately related with food, and indeed textiles as well. And what we're trying to do is reduce greenhouse gas emissions right across the supply chain, also to reduce waste, and also to manage water in a better way, making sure that we're not wasting water as part of this process as well. So overall, we're about driving systems change to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across key sectors that have a big impact on the global environment.
And about your role, Richard, tell us about your role and what you do on a day-to-day basis for WRAP.
Well, I'm really delighted to be working with WRAP, for WRAP, to deliver impact growth. So I'm the Director of Impact Growth, and my role is working with a whole team at WRAP to see if we can increase the amount of impact we're having around the world on the food system, on the textile system, and on the plastic system, and overall driving the circular economy in those three core areas.
Now, Richard, this is the Standard Show, and we ask pretty much all of our guests this question. We're doing this since the very beginning. It's about standards journeys. So I'm interested about your personal relationship with standards here. You know, how and when did it start for you, and where are you now?
Well, I suppose that I've been working with standards most of my career, Matthew. Standards has been at the heart of how we're thinking about driving change. But I guess just to bring it alive for the food one, I worked with a range of partners around the world, like WRI, UNEP, FAO, on developing the Food Loss and Waste Reporting Protocol, which is the first international approach to measurement, monitoring, and reporting of food waste around the world. And so we did that about 7 or 8 years ago now, and took about a year and a half to do. But what it did do was set down a consistent method of actually measuring and reporting food waste, which is now being widely adopted around the world, and is a central plank on delivering change in that sector. Because if you come back to the classic, if you don't measure, you can't manage. So critically, what standards do is help you come up with a consistent way of driving change that people can then adopt in a consistent way around the world.
Now, Richard, you have become, you are a standards maker with BSI, and you're also a committee chair, standards committee chair. So tell us about your committee and about your role as chair. And I'm particularly keen to know, why have you become a standards maker with BSI?
Well, I think if we're going to tackle food waste, we do need to be able to manage food waste and reduce food waste. And that is the core of what the committee that I run. So I run a mirror committee for the food loss and waste standard. And what we're all about is actually working alongside the International Standards Organization in developing a standard in this particular space, one that can be widely adopted by businesses around the world, one that is effective, one that is cost effective to use, one that businesses really want to implement because they want to see and drive change. And I'm delighted to say that I've got a great committee. It's broad based. It has technical experts. It has experts from industry, experts from academia, all working together or with a passion for tackling food loss and waste.
And Richard, do you enjoy your role as chair? Just sort of take us inside, give us some insight here. What does it mean as a role of chair of this committee, and are you enjoying that role?
Oh, I'm loving the role, Matthew. It's a real privilege to be working with so many people. I mean, I guess what's always lovely about running a mirror committee and working with people is everybody's got a shared common goal of using standards to drive change, and therefore, and they're all looking to see how we can make this as effective as possible. Making sure we're using the most up-to-date research in our thinking, making sure it's practical, and bringing together the different experiences of those around the room to come up with a better standard as a result, and to be able to feed into the international standards process is just fantastic. It's a real privilege.
Now, here to talk about food waste and food waste management. I just want to sort of ask a general question to begin with. What's the problem here? Food waste. What's the problem, and why should we care about it?
Well, food waste is a massive problem globally. And just to give you an idea, Matthew, around a third of all the food that we produce is wasted every single year. That's well over 1 billion tons of food waste every single year, worth well over $1 trillion. So this is a huge amount of money wasted, a huge amount of resources wasted. But just to give you a couple of statistics, just in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that are used to grow the food that we throw away, is about 8 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And to put that into context, if food waste was a country, and it would be a really smelly, horrible country, I have to say, but still, if it was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. And we need an area the size of China to grow the food that is thrown away every single year. And this is against a backdrop where around 1 in 9 people on the planet go to bed every night hungry. So there is really good economic reasons for tackling food waste. It's costing us a lot of money. There's very good environmental reasons for tackling food loss and waste because actually it's having a massive environmental impact, and we are actually growing food on important land and then chucking it away. And there's very good social reasons for tackling food loss and waste because, in essence, there are people hungry around the world and not getting a good diet and good nutrition, even though we're growing food that they could benefit from.
I mean, those figures are, and that context is kind of staggering, isn't it? And very sobering. I just wonder whether a huge problem, is it a huge growing problem? I mean, has this crept up on us? I mean, how long has it been that big a problem?
Well, I mean, we've known about the scale of the problem probably for about 10 years. 10 plus years, and there's been growing evidence, consistent measurement, and of course this is where standards come in, making sure we're actually measuring in a consistent way so that we've got reliable numbers. But it's slowly but surely we've been building globally, RAP and other organizations like UNEP, like FAO, like WRI, all actually trying to increase the awareness around the world of the scale of this of this waste, and also the fact that you can actually do things about it to reduce it substantially, saving money and saving carbon emissions and saving water, and also getting more food to those in need. So we've known about it for a little while. But what we've been trying to do is to raise awareness of this so that we can get more and more action and turn that awareness into action, of which standards is part of that process.
Now, I want to ask you, Richard, about the work, bit more about the work of the committee and the particular standard you're working on. Before we get to that, and you've sort of touched on it a little bit already, you've set out the huge problem here in terms of food waste and the impact that it has socially and environmentally and economically. What's the role of standards generally in helping address this problem?
Well, I guess where standards can really help is by helping businesses implement approaches that actually can tackle the problem in a consistent way. One that allows comparison of data, one that allows comparative approaches, one that allows businesses to learn how to do things in a consistent way and drive real change. And to give you an example of the benefits that this can do, we did some research with WRI looking at the cost benefits of tackling food loss and waste, and we did this in around 700 countries, 700 companies in multiple countries around the world, and looked at the costs of actually trying to reduce food loss and waste and the benefits that you get in terms of cost savings. And the median cost reduction, that means more than half of the companies measured were getting $14 back for every $1 invested in that space. So you are actually getting a superb return on investment. Now, in order to deliver that return on investment, having a good, clear standard that helps people say, okay, this is how I manage and reduce food loss and waste, can really help make it easy for businesses to act and actually reduce their food waste, manage and reduce their food waste, identify the hotspots, identify what they can do about it, reduce it and realize those cost savings. And also by having it implemented into their processes, it becomes part of their day-to-day operation. So what standards helps you do is operationalize change that can deliver, in this particular case, really good economic, environmental, and social outcomes.
Food for thought.
China and India produce more household food waste than any other countries worldwide, at an estimated 92 million and 69 million metric tonnes every year, respectively. This is unsurprising considering both countries have by far the largest global populations. Food waste is often thought to be concentrated in wealthier countries. However, in terms of food waste per capita, there are some similarities between developed and developing countries. It is estimated that per capita food waste production is actually highest in Western Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa.
Do you want to help make people's lives easier, safer, and more enjoyable? Well, why not become a standards maker and have your say on the development of standards? Standards affect all of us every day, wherever we go, whatever we do. By defining good practice, they help people, organizations, the economy, and society to do things better. Each year, standards bodies publish thousands of standards, and we are looking for more people like you to join our community of standards makers. We welcome applicants from all fields, backgrounds, and career stages. Our goal is to have a balance of views around the table. By becoming a standards maker, you could help to create cities that boost people's well-being, make strides in stem cell research, build more diverse workplaces, and even keeping food safe, sustainable, and responsibly sourced. So, if you want to make a difference and shape the world through standards, start your standards making journey now. Simply visit bsigroup.com/get involved.
In the first slice of my conversation with Richard Swannell, he set out the quite staggering scale of the food waste problem and the role of standards generally in helping to address it by, to use Richard's words, operationalising change. Now, in this second slice, I started by asking Richard about one particular standard, the upcoming ISO 20001. Now, Richard, you are chair of a BSI standards committee, and you are working on a particular standard, ISO 20001, development and utilization of a management system for the minimization of food loss and waste across the food value chain. So I'd really want to get into this about, to tell me about this standard. Why is it needed? What will it cover? What excites you about ISO 20001?
So Matthew, this comes back to, why is it important to tackle food loss and waste? We talked about the scale. A third of all food is wasted around the planet. And of course, actually, a lot of that wastage occurs within businesses. And I guess one of the things that you think about in this context is, why aren't businesses already tackling this? Because it doesn't make economic sense to be wasting significant amounts of food. And part of that problem, and this has been supported by research around the world, is that food waste is not being measured on a regular basis within these organizations. And what we found is, as soon as organizations start to measure food loss and waste within their operations, they start identifying hotspots, i.e. where there's a particular high amount of food waste, and also start thinking about how they can do something about that and start reducing it. And so this is where the ISO standard 20001 comes in, because what it does is it helps companies identify where the food waste is, measure in a consistent way, and start thinking about how to set targets to reduce, and then start thinking about reduction processes. And once you start doing that, you've changed the mindset. No longer are people saying, well, I don't have a food waste problem simply because I don't know I've got one there. You've actually got people saying, I now know exactly what my food waste problem is, and I know what I'm doing about it. And actually, I've set myself some targets and directions of travel that I'm going to try and achieve. And actually, interestingly, as businesses become more adept at measuring the process, what we find is ideas for reducing it come from the workforce, because the workforce often says, oh, crikey, we've got this amount of food waste. Now we know exactly what it is. What can we do to change it? Oh, yeah, we can tweak this. We can change that. If we do this in a different way, that reduces it. So what's great about this approach is, not only does it actually provide you data on which to act, but it also energizes the workforce around you to sort of drive change in that process. And finally, by understanding your sources of waste, you can understand how your supply chain, that's your suppliers and your customers, can also be part of the journey to reducing food loss and waste, because you've got good quality data. You understand the causes of food loss and waste. You understand the hotspots. You can then also work with your suppliers and your customers to help reduce that. And ISO 20001, I think, can be at the heart of driving that change.
Richard, you mentioned there a sort of energy from the workforce, which I was sort of jumped on there, because conversations take place within committee rooms, and I always like to ask standards makers, to take us inside some of the conversations that they've been having, because your job as chair is to ensure that there is consensus and agreement, or lack of disagreement, for the standard itself. So can you take us inside the committee and think, what are sort of the pressing conversations that you're having? What are the issues that you're coming up against? What are the, let's be honest, maybe what are some of the arguments you're having over the clauses? Where is the focus at the moment in the development of the standard?
So we're at a fairly early stage, Matthew, in the development of the standard, and so at the moment there's subgroups that have been worked up, which are looking at different components of the standard and feeding into the ISO process. So at this stage, on what we've been very lucky on, because in the Mirror Committee in the UK, many of the members have actually been working on food loss and waste reduction for a number of years, because the UK started working on food waste reduction as far back as 2007, 2008. And so there is actually a lot of consensus on how best to do this. This is based on experience, based on people doing this both in academia, but also doing this in business, in practice. So at the moment, what we're doing is making sure that we're scoping the standard effectively, and we're actually contributing effectively into the working groups, the subgroups that have been set up by the ISO standards. And to be fair, what I'm finding across is broad consensus across the committee at the moment as to how we might best do this. Because a lot of this is based on existing evidence, and making sure that that existing evidence is fed into the ISO process and fed into the standard in a consistent way. And the other area that as a committee, we're very keen on is making sure that with the approach of doing it is as efficient as possible and as effective as possible, so that we reduce the burdens and maximize the benefits on businesses from implementing the standards.
And this, Richard, I presume, because we're talking here about the entire food value chain, this standard will be applicable to all organisations operating in this space?
That's the idea. It operates right across the supply chain. That's right. Yeah. So it's specifically within businesses within sort of manufacturing, retail, hospitality, and food services. It's going right across that supply chain and should be applicable to all of those circumstances. And that is something that that the committee is thinking carefully about, making sure that what we have got is broadly applicable, because obviously the food supply chain is enormous across the planet, and what you want to be able to do is having a standard that can make a material change to the whole of that and be suitable for use at different stages of the supply chain. And certainly, what's the experience we've had over the years is you can, and what RAPA's done, for example, is come up with specific guidance for exactly how you do measurement at different points in the supply chain, and verified this research by doing work very closely with businesses. And some of that information is being fed into the process to make sure that what the output is going to be as effective and can operate at these different stages and be adapted to at different stages of the supply chain.
Now, you mentioned, Richard, the early stages, relatively early stages of the standards development, and you are sitting in your role as chair and convening a group of stakeholders and experts in the room to decide what good looks like. Now, just when you get to speculate here, 5, 10, 15 years maybe, when this standard is out there, it's published, it's being used, ultimately, what difference will it make?
Well, I think we all have the aspiration, Matthew, that this standard is part of a global movement towards halving food loss and waste around the world. Currently, UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 is all about halving food waste and reducing food loss right across the supply chain by 2030. And what I'd like to see is this standard plays a key role in delivering this change. We've talked about just how big an issue food waste is. A third of all the food that's produced on the planet, roughly speaking, is being wasted every single year with huge environmental consequences. What I'd love to do is see this standard being part of the journey of the world to dramatically reducing food loss waste and getting as close as possible to that 50% reduction target by 2030 or shortly after, because we do need this change to happen if we are going to actually transform the food system to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and also to reduce its environmental impact for the benefit of future generations.
You are a standards maker, Richard, and you're enjoying this role. I just wonder what you say to maybe young professionals out there who currently aren't involved in standards development. What would you say to them? Maybe what would you say to your younger self about getting involved in standards?
I guess, Matthew, what I'd say to my younger self, in fact, also what I'd probably say to my children is that there are many ways that you can drive change, because change is absolutely what we need to do to tackle the huge challenges that humanity face at the moment, particularly the ones of climate change. And standards has a role in driving that change, because standards can change the way you view things. This is the power of standards, doing things measuring things in a consistent way, and then having within the standard approaches that help you work out what you can do to reduce, in this particular case, the waste, but to reduce the impact that you're trying to get. So I think the critical thing about standards is it can really help you drive change. The one thing I would always say to myself is, and say to anybody who is interested in this area, is also let's make sure that standards are actually driving reductions as well as just the measurement. And this is one of the things that's really, really clear within the food loss and waste standard, is we're talking about setting targets, measuring, having reduction measures as part of this process, and monitoring and verification so that we know we're making the changes we need to do. So let's use standards to drive change that we need to have to achieve our environmental, our social, and our economic objectives.
Well, standards to operationalise change, and with regard to food loss and waste, to sort of drive change to meet our environmental, social and economic objectives, plus a really big role for ISO 20001 in helping to halve food loss and waste globally by 2030. I mean, how about that, Sydney Paragon?
Oh yeah, big ambitions and certainly the right ones. It was just great to hear the passion and commitment from Richard, and also to hear about ISO 20001. what is going to be a really important international standard.
Indeed. So, Cindy, we should say a huge thank you to Richard Swannell from RAP.
We should. And we should also say thank you to Sarah Walton from BSI. If you want to find out about some of the issues raised in this episode, including how to get involved in standards, then check out the links in the show notes.
So, Cindy Paragal, that's food waste management and the end of the series.
I know. What a journey, Matthew Childs. We have gone through the whole farm to fork cycle of innovation, production, packaging, distribution, consumption, and of course, waste management, and featured some of the key standards involved in each of them.
We have indeed, and as it is the end of the series, we should take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to all of the guests and contributors who either spoken to us, hosted us, and helped us over the past 6 episodes, and of course to the many BSI and ISO colleagues too.
Yes, we should. We could have not done it without them. So, any particular favourite moments?
Yeah, quite a few really. I remember in episode 4 on food production, remember that one? We got into a very interesting debate with colleagues from Lincoln University about melons from Brazil, about whether they liked melons or not. That was fun. And way back on that very first episode, we talked to people about lab cultivated meat and biofortified crops. I just found that stuff absolutely fascinating. But I think the one that really jumps out for me is episode 2, when we got out and about. You remember I had to put on full PPE garb and equipment.
How can I forget?
And I had a tour around Rayner's Sandwich Factory. That was the episode we did on food production. Mm-hmm. And that sound of the sandwich machine, I think it will always be with me. I don't know how the people who work there could live with that sound of the machine all day. So that one really stood out for me. But how about you?
Well, actually, my favourite bit was in the very same episode. So meeting beef farmer Dan Burling's incredibly friendly stabiliser breed of cows when we went down on the farm in Cambridgeshire to talk to them about the impact of digital transformation and standards on beef production. It was such a great day recording on the farm and spending time with the animals.
That was a really lovely day, wasn't it? Though I do remember we did spend quite a lot of our time talking about your hunter boots.
Yes, we did.
Have you actually worn those since?
Maybe. Anyway, we should say that you can find a link to all of the episodes in this series, including the now infamous Down on the Farm episode, in the show notes.
And a final thank you to the very nice people at the To Love Tea and Coffee House in Battersea, who have hosted us for most of the episodes. In fact, Cindy, yes, we should huge thank you to them. It's fantastic location, isn't it? And we should say an amazing cake range there. So any favourites from their cake range?
Oh, really difficult. I must say all of them. They were just so delicious. But I think the pistachio lemon cake and the red velvet cake that I had back in episode 3 on food packaging, that really stood out for me. What about you, Matthew?
Oh, it's an easy one. Burnt Basque cheesecake, episode 4 on food distribution. Stunning. If you remember, I think I said, if cheesecake is on offer, then it just trumps everything. However, though, don't we agree that Victoria Sponge is the best cake overall generally?
You don't give up, do you?
I don't. Right, we finished on food waste management, and I'm going to manage very easily in not letting this particular food go to waste.
Me too. No way.
That is really good.
You have been listening to Farm to Fork, the relationship between standards and food, a series from The Standard Show. Subscribe to us now, wherever you get your podcasts.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.